Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, Chief Storymaker and your host of this podcast. We share stories for many reasons. We want to persuade, we want to entertain, and we want to connect. But what we sometimes forget is the impact of the stories we tell ourselves. Whether you're sharing personal stories or business stories, how you share them makes a difference in how you remember them and in how you're being perceived by the people you're sharing them with. In this series, you'll hear stories that will resonate with you and you'll nod your head in understanding, and then we'll dig into lessons from each of those stories. How many times have you been sharing a story only to be interrupted by a person eager to share his own? Well, when I'm working with clients on communication skills, I remind them to listen for understanding, but not to respond necessarily. But during this podcast, I'm asking you to listen and consider your related stories, and think about which stories in your life might have impacted you in a similar way.
Today, I'm featuring a woman that I met in kind of odd circumstances, but anyone who knows me won't think it's odd at all. Her name is Shiquita Yarbrough, and I met her at the Atlanta airport on my way back from a big trip. For some reason, we just started talking, and I felt connected to her immediately. And then once I realized how much generosity was in this woman, I was convinced that I had to have her on my podcast and ask her where this came from and how she demonstrates that without telling people how generous she is. And I don't mean just generous with finances. I'm talking about generosity of spirit. So, Shiquita, I have to ask you the question that I ask all of my podcast guests because I like our listeners to be able to learn a little bit about you, to feel more connected with you before they start hearing your personal stories. So the question is, tell us something that most people don't know about you that might surprise people who know you.
One of the things I think that a lot of people don't know about me, they do know that I love children. I love kids. And if I could have, I would have had 10 kids. That's how much I love kids, right? But one of the things that most people don't know is when I was probably 12 or 13 or even younger, I babysat other people's kids all the time. And to the point to where they would spend the night and my mom would allow them to spend the night. But to have that huge of a responsibility at such a young age, where parents would trust me with their babies and toddlers, it kind of blows my mind now, but but to be so young and for a parent to look at me and say she's responsible and we will allow her to babysit. And it wasn't for money either. I just did it because I love kids at such a young age. I love babies at such a young age. And most people don't even know that I did that. I don't even know if my own kids know I actually babysat kids when I was like 12, 13 years old.
You know what's especially interesting about that is that I babysat pretty young as well, mostly because I have a little sister who's 5 years younger than I am. So I babysat her from the time I was about 10, and then later on started babysitting. But what changed for me was I realized I didn't want children. And clearly, all that experience for you just confirmed that you loved children and that you wanted kids.
Yeah, that's right.
Wow, I love that. That's a good story. Thank you. That's a lot of people may have, if you ask them, they might guess that. But I love that you can share that story because it really demonstrates a lot about, even in the 20 minutes that we talked at the airport, it demonstrates a lot of the qualities that I knew about you immediately. So thank you. The reason I wanted to talk to you on this podcast was I have this theme in my head about being generous without necessarily having a lot of money to give. And whether that's being generous with your time or being generous with your compassion and being generous with your curiosity about people. But what struck me about our conversation was your generosity of bringing people into your home to feed them, because I'm a huge believer in that. So you told me a story about some really hard times that you had when your children were little, and something that you created as a result of realizing how much help and support that you had over the years. So can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Well, I had divorced. I lived in the state of Tennessee. And after my divorce, I moved to the state of Texas and to a city, Austin, which was, had never been there, didn't have any family, that, just researched and saw that Austin was a growing city and moved there with my 4 kids. But my oldest daughter was already in college at the time. So I had a she was 3 years old, and one that was 5, and then my son that was getting ready to go into middle school. So I have 2 boys and 2 girls. And so it was challenging enough to move to a different state where you didn't have anybody you can call or depend on. And so immediately I felt welcomed and comfortable in the city of Austin. People were just so kind and, hospitable towards me and my family. And so I believe in getting my kids, making sure that they are active in the community, whether it is with sports or whatever they can do in their age group. And so my kids, my 5-year-old was in football. I put him in football, and my other son, I put him in. Both of my boys were in football. My daughter didn't want to do cheerleading or anything like that. So anyway, so just keeping them busy and active in the community and doing things in sports or whatever I could do, which means that when your kids are busy, the parents are busy as well. Unfortunate for me, it's only one of me, and I had 3 kids at home. So a lot of times people that had kids in these sports or other activities would see that I was by myself, and it was really hard for me to juggle one of me with 3 different activities, or even just with my youngest daughter and then go with different places with the boys. So people in the community start saying, hey, I'll tell you what, I could drop this one off at home if you want to go to that one and do this and that. So at first I was like, can I trust my kids with someone else? Can I trust that person with my kids? Both ways, actually. And so I did. You have to, I'm vulnerable at that time. I need help. And a lot of times single parents have an issue with allowing for that help, because we think we can do it all, which I don't want to do it all, but sometimes we have to do it all. But they allowed me the opportunity to not have to do it all. And so teachers that was so awesome for my kids with the transition of moving to a different state and everything. So what happened was I realized that these people were so good to me. I wish that when Christmas time came, I wish I could give them gifts. It's a holiday season. And I said, man, I wish I had money to buy gifts for these people who are so wonderful in my life, in my children's lives. And, but I just didn't have the money to buy everybody a gift, like the teachers, the people in the community, and all of these things. So I thought, well, one thing I can do is cook. I love to cook. And I said, well, I could cook for them. And I thought about maybe making individual, like little cakes or something like that. And I was like, no, that wouldn't show how much I appreciate them. So I wanted to have a dinner. And so instead of having a Thanksgiving dinner, I had a giving thanks dinner. And the giving thanks dinner will be the day before Thanksgiving. So that gave me the opportunity to say thank you. I want to give thanks to all of you for being a part of my life and my children's lives. And I know it's not much, but this is who I am. And I want to show my appreciation to you by doing this for you. And I told the kids they can invite their friends who they feel very close to or felt like that they have benefited having them in their lives, and their teachers. And I've invited teachers and people in the community. So the first year, I don't know, we probably had like maybe 15 people, and it increased every year. It's so funny because the year after that, people would call the kids or call me or email me and say, hey, are you having a Giving Thanks dinner again this year? It was so good, because they still were able to have their Thanksgiving dinner on Thanksgiving. So, but they got to sit down and relax on Wednesday so that I can cater to them and serve them. And so that went on for a few years until I moved to Colorado. And the last year before I moved to Colorado, we had over 40 people in my house.
Wow. You fed 40 people. That had to have been expensive for ingredients, though.
Well, yeah, it was, but you plan for things like that,
Right.
And I did Evite to see who all were coming so that I would have a head count. But it was okay. I knew that was the time that I can give, and I knew that made people happy, and they actually appreciated it.
So tell me about that first time. People are walking in your house. They probably never been there before, or maybe they had once or twice. What was the expression? What was the energy like when they first walked in and your children greeted them?
Well, the first time I had it, and so I stayed in an apartment, and of course my apartment would have been too small. So I rented out the cabana house or whatever they had in the apartments where you could rent out. And so I did that, and people were like, oh, this is so nice, because I had all the food laid out, and the kids because the reason why I did it in there as well was because the kids were younger, and it was things for them to do with their friends, right, while the adults could sit down, have a glass of wine, and just talk about life, right? And so that was a great opportunity, but people was like, oh my gosh, look at all this food. And so what I asked from everyone that attended, I said, just one thing I ask of you all is for all of us to go around in a circle to say what we are grateful and thankful for. And that's what we do. Every year we go around and say what we're thankful for. And of course, at that first one, my thankfulness was having them a part of our life.
Do you remember what you served, the food?
The very first time I served brisket, greens, macaroni and cheese. I did a pina colada cheesecake.
Oh, yum.
I make my own hot wing sauce. So we had appetizers. I made hot wings, mashed potatoes and gravy.
That sounds delicious.
And lasagna. So, yeah.
Wow, lasagna and brisket? 2 different entrees. Wow. That's a lot of work. Did it take you 2 days ahead?
Well, yeah, I marinate my brisket I marinate it and then put it in the freezer like a week prior, and then slow cook it, and then that's how I did it. And I was very upset the very first time. I remember partially what I cooked because my oldest son and my friend ate almost half the brisket because they couldn't stop eating it. I was so upset. I remember going back to the store to get something, and I came back and the brisket had been messed with and they kept eating it, and I was so upset. And then because the apartment was a little ways from where we were having it in the apartment complex, my son took out the yellow, we had made yellow rice. Some of the things the kids wanted me to make. So I made this yellow rice, and my second son dropped it, the whole bowl of rice on the floor. So,
of course he did.
Of course he did. Yeah. So that's how that happened. But what I did, I asked everyone to bring their beverage of choice.
Mm-hmm.
So I never had to supply, ginger, soda, pops, or wine, or whiskey, or margaritas, or anything like that. Everyone brought what they wanted to drink. And every year it got better and better and better. So
Of course it did. Do you remember anything specific that somebody said around that circle that first year, like one of your kids? Because my kids, when we do something like that, there's always some sarcastic, but somewhere some truth in it, their comment. Do you have any memory of that?
I just remember that how shy my kids were actually. I remember the most that I remember is what the guests were saying, mm-hmm. how grateful they were for that, to be there and to spend that time and to be able to be looked upon as someone special to me. So I remember that. And, the kids basically just said, I am thankful for my mom, mm-hmm. or I'm thankful for my teacher, or things like that.
Right.
But it got better over the years, So.
Of course, because they got more comfortable saying what they were feeling.
I just remember I also did it here in Colorado. And so I remember my son's girlfriend at the time, she came to visit from Texas, and my son was here, my oldest son. And I invited the same thing. The kids invite their teachers, their friends, and we had teachers in my house that day, and it was on a Wednesday and everything. So I had a lot of college students here in the house. And so it was football players. I mean, our house was pretty full. And so I remember now she's my daughter-in-law, but at the time when we went around in a circle and he said, I am thankful for her coming here to spend Thanksgiving with me. And she told me later that she teared up because that meant so much to her, that he was thankful for her to come and to spend Thanksgiving with him. So that's the impact of how people feel, and to be able to have the opportunity to express themselves in front of strangers, complete strangers. All those people that were there, they didn't know one another, except for the teachers and the students, like my son and his teachers and some of the other students, mm-hmm. but that's it. So yeah, now I have a daughter-in-law after that.
So two things popped into my head. One is, if you do any reading on brain science, one of the things that my friend Melissa Hughes, she wrote the book Happy Hour with Einstein. One of the things she talks about a lot is the impact of gratitude on our brains. That it has such a huge impact on the release of the happy chemicals that are in our brain. And the thing that always struck me about my conversations with her is that she said, it's one thing for us to say we're thank you to when we say I'm appreciative of you, or I'm grateful for you, or thank you for this, or thank you for that. And that does immediately release those brain chemicals, the happy brain chemicals. And I'm zoning on exactly which ones they are. But the other person in front of you feels it, but to a lesser extent. And if you write a thank you note, you release all those chemicals in a much greater expression than the person who receives it. Mm. So that's the first thing that popped into my head, is these people are going around sharing what they're grateful for. And although the people around them are hearing it and they're feeling those bubbling, happy thoughts in their heads and the energy feels good, but it's the person who's expressing it that's getting the most out of it.
Right. I believe that. I do.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing that popped into my head was I can imagine that your children, this is part of what makes your son such a wonderful partner for his wife, is that he understands gratitude and he understands struggle. And he also understands that you can't do it by yourself. You could, but everything's better when you figure out a way to ask for help and then express your gratitude for that help. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So tell me about your kids now and what they talk about when they talk about those memories in Austin.
Oh my goodness. So my oldest daughter, she is my powerhouse prep girl. So, I mean, I could serve 200 people with her.
Wow.
And yeah, we are great managers. And so we can make things happen real quick because we like everything to be organized. So my oldest daughter, I think she enjoys that time that she had, to spend with me prepping, because we talk about things while she's chopping up the onions and, or cutting the potatoes or whatever it may be, and tasting the food. And she's a very picky eater. So I have to make sure I make her whatever it is that, she needs and what she wants. But with her, it's that quality time she gets to spend with me. And when I have her in the kitchen, I think I am my calmest, if that makes sense, because we just work so well together in the kitchen. And we work well together with anything, getting anything done. So I think she always talks about that, especially the one in Texas, because that was the largest one. The last one was the largest one.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, Mom, I just don't understand. Oh, we were out of food. I mean, and I cooked, and I had 2 briskets, 2 pans of lasagna, and we had cheese trays, and we had appetizers, and all of this stuff. I mean, it's just crazy how we ran out of food. I had a whole 4 tiers of a dessert cart gone. Everything was gone. It was just crazy. Wow. So she still talks about that one and how much fun it was and things like that. My oldest son, although he really doesn't, he talks about it, like each event, what happened and things like that. And he really doesn't care as long as he has his own pan of lasagna. He doesn't care. He's the biggest eater out of all my kids. So he's like, I don't care. As long as I have my own pan of lasagna, I'm good, Mom. I'm good, So I think he loves being around people too. He's real good. My second son, I think he enjoys having his friends around, knowing that his mom can cook and the food will be good. So he will brag about the food, and so I think he likes that. He liked that part about having his friends there and knowing that his mom is a good cook and knowing that his friends are going to love the food and things like that. My youngest daughter, she just want to eat and not have to clean up. So
yeah, I get that. I have one that does that too. The reason I ask you this is that a while back we started doing these Passover dinners. So we have a Jewish household, and when we moved to Montana, we realized there's a very small Jewish population here in Helena. And I think it was the second year that we were in this house, which was probably about 16, 17 years ago. We invited a few of the friends that we had in the Jewish community, but we also invited some of our neighbors that are not Jewish and friends that are not Jewish. And I remember sitting around the table and feeling very grateful for the people who were at our table, the curiosity, the openness, the appreciation for what was going on around them. And we did it every year, and it's a big production. It's not like you put the food out and everybody eats. With Passover, you have a whole ceremony, and you have symbols on the table that you have to put out there. And when the boys were little, I'd put one of them in charge of rinsing the parsley and putting it on the plates and putting it on the table. And I'd put one in charge of making the salt water that you dip the parsley in as part of the ceremony. And I would make sure that they were setting the table, because that was something kids as young as 5, 6 years old can set the table. And so they would do that. It was always stressful for me leading up to it. As much as I love doing the prep work, it was pretty stressful because, I am not very good at delegating. So I'd have all these plans in my head, and my husband would say, well, what do you want me to do? And I'd be like, nothing, I got this, which was kind of stupid. And now I know that. But I remember every year we did it, and some years we had 14, some years we had 23, one year we had 28, and it was big. And I make brisket, which is funny, and we'll have to swap recipes at some point. Mine is the recipe that my Aunt Leslie gave me, and everybody raves about it, so we'll have to trade.
Yes.
Anyway, the reason I brought this up was a few years ago when my father died. He died on February 22nd. It was 4.5 years ago. And that Passover came up at spring, and I did not have the energy to do it. I didn't have the emotional capacity to put together that evening. It was a hard year, but especially a few months following. It was especially hard a few months following. And when we sat down for dinner on the first night of Passover and we did our own little ceremony, just the four of us, I asked the boys what they were grateful for. And one of them said, I'm really grateful that we did this, just the four of us, instead of just not doing it at all. So I'm glad that we're together. He said, but I'm also grateful that we've had the experience of hosting people at this dinner table so many times, because it's always different every time. And I love it. And these are these memories that we're building with our children of feeding people. And as we talked about in the airport that day, we're not just feeding them food. When you're feeding people, especially good, healthy food, the food that came out of your kitchen, not processed from some kitchen somewhere far away.
Right.
When we make that food with love and thoughts of gratitude, we're nourishing people. We're not just feeding them. And I think our children know that. And they clearly understand how much we get out of it, how meaningful it is to us to be able to do that for people.
I agree. Just to know that how it has impacted other people too, because, when people ask me all the time, are you going to do that again this year? My daughter-in-law, some of the food she never had before. And she said, Mom, she calls me Mom. And she said, Mom,
Yay.
I know, right? She said, Mom, I never had homemade chili before, because in her household, they didn't cook a lot. So they ate out a lot. So she was really leery of eating my chili because she had never had it before. I mean, it's a lot of food she never had before because she was so used to eating out. And so when she went back to school in Texas one time, she told my son that I am craving your mom's chili. Oh my God. And so, some kids, and so now people look at when they go to someone else's house to eat, and they may have mac and cheese, or you would not believe how many Jewish friends I have. My sister, who I call my sister, is going to have me to cook for the holidays. She's sneaky because she had got me a football ticket to go see Chicago Bears because I'm originally from Chicago. And it was around the holiday time. And she said, you could just stay. It's only a few days from the holiday. And I said, oh, I see the ulterior motive. I'm cooking, huh? And she just started crying. laughing. And so my nephew already is telling me that she already has a list of people, list of food that I'm cooking, and I have no clue I'm cooking. But to know that, and she says like her dad still talks about the desserts that I cooked when they would come over for the giving thanks dinner, things like that create memories. So yes, I could have bought gifts. I could have, crocheted something and gave it to someone. But what I have done and what you have done, we created memories for people to the point to where it make them feel good. And it's all about, what your friend wrote about. It's that feeling of satisfaction, of reward. When you can make someone else feel good, it makes you feel good. And that memory will stay with them forever. Whereas if we purchased something and gave it to someone and say, hey, I appreciate what you did for my kids, I appreciate what you've done for me, who knows what may happen to that item or that merchandise, They may remember what it looked like at one point, but if it's lost because they move, it's not in their heart. The thought of me buying it may be in their heart, but the memory of sharing, I think always stays with us.
There's a phrase, breaking bread together. There's a reason. And I can't stress enough how important it is to meet people face to face and break bread together. It changes your relationship forever. Yes. I am so grateful that you took this time to chat with me. I'm also grateful that we met at the airport and that we had an opportunity to just talk for a few minutes with your youngest daughter there. Yes. And I'll be really curious to hear what she thinks when she hears this podcast, because it's about them. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, as much reward as I get by contributing like that, by having people over for dinner, by feeding people, my ulterior motive is really about what am I demonstrating to my children? What are they learning from this? What are they gathering from this? And I know that the people who sit at our tables pay it forward in some way or other. Yes,
that's right. That's right. And I do believe that. I do believe that because, my daughter-in-law was so impacted by that's what she wants to do. She wants to always have people over for dinner now. She wants to host little small events or with other coworkers and things like that. And my son is like, yeah, okay, because he's used to it. He knows what it's like to host people and to make them smile. And as you said, which is so important, to give them that opportunity to build memories of hospitality, of comfort, of nourishment. Wow. Yeah. This is exactly what I was hoping I would get from our conversation, and I hope our listeners appreciate it as well. Just so that our listeners know, I will have Shiquita's contact information on the blog post associated with this podcast in case you want to reach out to her. I'll also have a link to the Community Foundation organization that she works for right now in case you want to make a contribution in her honor as one generous person to another. And so we'll have a blog post associated with this podcast out and with those links. Shiquita, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Share Them Will. Please visit my website for more podcast episodes, blog posts, and information about how I can help you develop and share your stories at elkinsconsulting.com.
Listen to me, honey, while I say, how could you tell me that you're going